You are still in the credit department when it starts, still wearing the same cheap watch you bought after your first bonus, still thinking your job is to move numbers from one spreadsheet to another and tell yourself that risk can be measured if it is categorized well enough. It is 9:12 p.m. on a Thursday, and you are reconciling covenant breaches for a regional bank that is too small to feel powerful and too exposed to survive a mistake. Then the head of lending calls you into the conference room and closes the door behind you. The bank's largest borrower, a distribution company with 1,800 employees and 3 states depending on its payroll, has lied on its inventory reports for 6 quarters. The auditors know. The board knows. By morning, the market will know. If the company collapses, your bank takes a hit large enough to trigger a capital crisis. If the bank wobbles, depositors run. If depositors run, everyone in this room loses more than a job. The head of lending does not ask whether the company deserves to survive. He asks whether you can keep it alive until Monday without putting up a dollar the bank does not have. That is the first time you understand that money is not really money. Money is time, permission, confidence, sequence. You do not save the company with cash because there is no cash to use. You call the company's biggest customers and offer discounts for prepayment. You push suppliers into extending terms by telling them bankruptcy court will pay them less. You structure a sale-leaseback on the trucking fleet before dawn. You convince the founder's son to subordinate his claim, because if he doesn't, his equity goes to zero by sunrise. None of it is clean. All of it works. Payroll clears. The headlines are delayed. The bank survives the week. The company survives the month. 200 vendors unknowingly become your bridge financing. Thousands of workers keep their jobs because you move obligations around faster than panic can spread. On Monday, the head of lending tells you that you have a talent for building a wall out of promises. 2 weeks later, a man from a private investment firm offers you a desk, a title, and a sentence that changes the rest of your life. If you know how to control cash you do not own, you never need to be rich to become powerful. At first, you tell yourself you are a rescuer. You buy distressed companies with pension money, endowment money, sovereign money, insurance float, warehouse lines from banks that pretend not to worry, seller notes from founders too proud to admit they are financing their own exit. You put in almost none of your own capital. You do not need to. You learn that the person who contributes the least cash can still control the board, the debt stack, the voting rights, the covenants, the refinancing calendar, and therefore the fate of everyone involved. In year 1, you help acquire a packaging business with 8% equity, 52% bank debt, 20% seller financing, and the rest from limited partners who will never meet the workers whose health plans depend on the numbers in your model. In year 3, you run your own fund. In year 5, you stop buying companies and start buying the lenders who finance the companies. In year 7, you control 38 operating businesses, 26,000 employees, $11.4 billion in assets, and less than 4% of the equity behind the entire machine. That is when the moral arithmetic changes. Early on, failure means embarrassment, maybe a lawsuit, maybe one bad fund. Later, failure means towns losing hospitals, retirees losing distributions, banks rewriting covenants, governments calling to ask whether layoffs can be delayed after elections. You are no longer moving capital, you are moving consequences. You tell yourself this is still better than chaos. You take over companies that are badly run, over-leveraged, inherited by children who mistake entitlement for competence. Sometimes you are right. You cut waste, refinance expensive debt, replace loyal incompetence with ruthless professionals, and triple enterprise value in 30 months. But sometimes your gains come from deciding who absorbs pain first. When a portfolio company misses numbers, you suspend hiring, freeze pensions, sell real estate, and push maturities past the next reporting period, because one quarter of stability buys another quarter of belief. Belief is enough to refinance. Refinancing is enough to survive. Survival is enough to pay yourself a fee. You build layers because layers are control. A management company collects fees no matter how the funds perform. A credit arm lends to your own acquisitions at market rates that you quietly help define. An insurance vehicle gives you float, patient and enormous, as long as claims arrive slower than returns. A real estate trust buys the buildings your companies operate from, then leases them back at terms your companies cannot escape. Family offices call you disciplined. Journalists call you mysterious. Regulators call you complicated. Your enemies call you a man who buys things with invisible cash. They are all correct. You learn that ownership is noisy, but control hides inside documents no one reads until it's too late. Then rates rise fast enough to expose every elegant lie in the system. Debt that looked cheap turns predatory. Exit multiples compress. One of your lenders gets nervous and refuses to roll a $600 million warehouse facility. A short seller publishes a report accusing your empire of circular valuations, fee extraction, and balance sheet cosmetics. They are not entirely wrong. Limited partners demand calls. Portfolio CEOs begin speaking in the careful tone people use when they are deciding whether to save themselves. For the first time in years, the machine needs actual trust, not just structure, and trust is the one asset you cannot refinance. You spend 72 hours building a continuation vehicle to move your best assets out of the fund that is drowning. You ask teachers' pensions to double down so firefighters' pensions don't take the loss this quarter. You tell yourself that if you can buy 6 months, you can fix the assets. You know the uglier truth. If you can buy 6 months, the losses become someone else's timing problem. You do it anyway. That is the line you cross without admitting it's a line. Not when you first use leverage, not when you first strip a founder of control using default language he never understood, not when you first take a dividend out of a company that still needs the cash. The line is crossed when you fully understand that your empire survives by deciding who waits, who pays, who gets diluted, who gets bought out, who gets reassured, and who gets sacrificed quietly enough that confidence holds for one more quarter. You are no longer a financier. You are a traffic controller for obligations, directing floods away from yourself and toward whoever has the least power to resist. And still, the empire grows. Crisis makes you bigger because weak owners sell cheap and scared lenders need someone who can close. By the 10th year, ministers return your calls, central bankers recognize your name, founders who once mocked your thin balance sheet now ask you to rescue companies twice the size of the first one you saved. You finally become personally wealthy, but by then your own money is almost irrelevant. Your real fortune is access, the ability to summon capital that belongs to strangers and make it move as if it were an extension of your will. That is the secret at the center of the whole system. The richest person in the room is not always the one with the most money. It's the one who knows how to make everyone else's money behave. Tonight, you sit over another maturity wall, another refinancing, another elegant emergency. On paper, you control more than ever. In reality, everything you built is still borrowed. The capital, the confidence, the time. If enough people ask for all three back at once, your empire stops being an empire and becomes evidence. You know that now. You know that every tower you raise with other people's money is also a promise to people you may never meet. You know how many lives sit beneath each basis point, each covenant, each extension. You know exactly what kind of person keeps building anyway. And when the call comes in telling you that one of your largest lenders wants to revisit terms before markets open, you do what you have always done. You reach for the phone, open the model, and prepare to save yourself with money that is not yours.